Hello, everyone. Hey, Tim. All right. So very happy off. For me, it's my first Kichi Joji Kaigi, and I'm sure that I guess the first one in quite a long time. It seems, right? All right. So I'm here today to give a brief introduction to type checking in Ruby. So today, basically, just want to answer two questions. The first being, how did type checking for Ruby come about? And to answer that question, we'll kind of go back in time a little bit and take a look at some, I guess, key events that identify key events that were instrumental into bringing type checking to Ruby. Then we'll also take a look into some of the motivation. And then we'll try and piece together all the different parts of the type checking ecosystem, because it was a lot more convoluted than I thought it was going to be. Second question I want to answer today is, how easy is it to adopt type checking into an existing project that, isn't actively doing it? And I hope to do some basic, sandbox demos, and then maybe give a brief overview of Sorbet, which is a type checking tool. Okay, so I'm meeting a lot of people for the first time today, so figured I'd give a few fun facts about myself. So I really enjoy. First thing, I really enjoy cycling. So last year, before I joined Educa, I went on a 2-week-long ride with one of my best friends. We just rode around the circumference of Taiwan, going to different cities, and I hope to do that in Japan someday, going from end to end. I don't know, we'll see. That's my bicycle. It's taking to Akigawa Valley. I'm also really good at cutting grapefruit and pomelo. And the reason for that is one of the best things about living in Taiwan is that it's super hot all the time. Well, I actually don't like that, but because it's super hot all the time, you can all the cold drinks. It makes it that much more enjoyable. So one of my favorite things to help me keep me cool was fruit tea. So I got super into grapefruit fruit tea. So for me, any time is a good time to drink grapefruit tea. And then I guess like many others here, really into music and video games. And this is a custom edition EV bookshelf speaker set that I made. All right, enough about me. So how did type checking for Ruby come about? Okay, so way back in 2016, Mats announced his plan for Ruby 3. I think it was called the 3x3 or 3x3. I actually don't know how to properly say that. But anyways, the first 3 is for Ruby 3.0. And the second 3 was to indicate the kind of the key emphasis points. So the first being improving performance, introducing concurrency model, and the last being static typing. So a year after that, you may know of a company called Stripe. They started developing Sorbet, what they advertise as a gradual static type checking system. And I'll explain a little bit more in detail about what that is later on. A couple of years later, Sorbet was open source. And then last year, I think on Christmas, right? Ruby 3 was shipped, and a language for describing or for type checkers to build on top of called RBS was shipped with Ruby 3. And I'll explain a little bit about that as well a little bit. So I guess one of the questions you may be asking is, why was static typing emphasized for Ruby 3? Traditionally, Ruby is a dynamically typed language. So, why are we kind of going towards the opposite side and introducing this? So, when I was first learning Ruby, one of the core tenets for Ruby was emphasizing developer happiness. So I think some of the key motivation for introducing static typing to Ruby 3, I guess can kind of directly correlate to that. So with the adoption of static type checking, it is believed that we can find more bugs more easily. We can handle nil better, and with all the type information that we have, our IDEs can really improve our developer experience. So things like what is it? Code suggestions, or like source code navigation, syntax highlighting, uh, showing errors in the editor or documentation. Yeah, these are all things that can benefit greatly from exposing typing information. And then another thing is that maybe it's believed that adding static type checking will help us understand our code better, because we have a clear clear emphasis of like what types we can expect this method to accept as arguments, and so on and so forth. So next, just wanted to kind of give a overview of all the different moving parts in this type checking ecosystem. So here in Japan, when Ruby 3 was released, it was really two tools. Well, so the first being RBS, which is a language used to kind of describe the structure of your Ruby program. So basically just allowing you to annotate types for different methods, constants, things like that. And typeprof is basically another Ruby interpreter that kind of analyzes, tracks, and guesses types as it's kind of executing your program. So I guess now would be a good time to kind of look at what an RBS file looks like. Can you? Shoot, I should probably make this a little bigger. So as you can see here, this is a RBS file for an example chat app. So you can see it. I mean, the syntax is pretty similar to Ruby. Obviously, you can designate different types, expected types for different attributes, as well as arguments. There's also a couple of neat things like supporting, like for example, maybe one of your methods can accept not just one class, but multiple. So there's support for what's called union types. So for example, this message, there's a from attribute, and it could be a user or like of type user or type bot. And then the next one you see down here, message, there's also support for what's called optional types. So maybe this reply to it accepts not only message but also accepts nil. And then another thing that's also interesting is like basically you can overload typing information for methods. So for example, if you look at each member, you can call it with a block or without. So if you call it with a block, then it's pretty normal. It'll take that block and it'll yield and it'll do stuff. But if you don't, then it just returns an enumerator. So this forms the basis for which other type checker tools can use. So going back, the type checker that was developed here in Japan is called Steep. And I believe, Yuki, didn't you contribute to Steep, right? Yeah? Yeah, so I actually have not tried using Steep. But yeah, I just wanted to mention it because there's different type checker tools available for Ruby. It's not just Sorbet. Meanwhile, outside of Japan, there's a company called Stripe, and they open sourced Sorbet in 2019. So kind of a key difference is Sorbet does not use RBS to describe the Ruby programs. It uses its own format called RBI file, and I'll show that in a little bit. And basically, there's a couple of, it's kind of broken into two key components. One being this CLI tool that is responsible for performing the static analysis, and also is a convenient way to kind of set up an existing project or a new project for Sorbet. And there's another component called the Sorbet runtime. It's just a gem that allows you to, if you include one of their modules, you can basically add inline type annotations for code that you own. And also does runtime checks. And there's another tool by Shopify called Tapioca, and it can also is another tool to basically generate these RBI files. So yeah, a lot of different tools that you can use to add types to your code. So yeah, like when I was first looking into this stuff, got a little bit confused. So basically, RBS and RBI, they simply just describe the structure of Ruby programs. So they allow you to add type information. The actual type checkers themselves are Steep and Sorbet. And so I guess a lot of people that look into this, they get kind of confused and like, so why are there, like multiple things? Like, are the Ruby core team and Sorbet team kind of like competing against each other? But that is actually, it's not the case. They've actually been working together to, kind of like trade different experiences and things that they learned to basically improve RBS, RBI, Steep, and Sorbet. And I believe currently Sorbet does not have support for RBS, but I think in the future they will. They stated that they're committed. So I mean, we'll see what happens with that. Okay, question number 2. So how does one go about adopting type checking for a Ruby project? Okay, so it's demo time. No, I got it. I don't need to type anything. Okay, so Sorbet is a type checking tool by Stripe, and this is kind of what it looks like. They have a pretty nifty site that you can use to kind of like demo it out. So the homepage actually has this sample code. So nothing really too complex, but basically, if you want to add type annotations to code that you own, you can extend this module, and then it'll expose this this sig method, and you can use this to kind of to basically annotate your types. So basically, foo, it accepts integer parameter called x, and it doesn't return anything. So that's how you add type annotations, and Sorbet will use this to check against when your code's running. So, for example, if we try to call foo with 0, Sorbet will yell at us. They'll say, "Hey, method foo does not exist," and it'll even offer a suggestion like, "Hey, did you actually mean foo, not foo?" Or maybe we call the correct method, but we give it an unexpected type. So here it's expecting an integer, but we're giving it a string. So Sorbet will yell at us as well. And yeah, so as you can see, expected integer for argument x of method foo. Also wanted to briefly just touch on typeprof. I mean, you wouldn't use this on any of your projects, but I just wanted to bring it up. I don't want to like leave things out. But this is the experimental interpreter for basically trying to guess types by evaluating the code. So you can see typeprof is actually using RBS. It's not using the RBI file that's associated with Sorbet. It's using RBS file. So analyze it. So yeah, this is just the output that it puts out. Yeah, maybe a little bit more, I don't know, maybe a little bit more, maybe not as like user friendly, but it also, it kind of does the same thing, just with a different format. Let's see. So I kind of also wanted to briefly, and now that I've spent a whopping, I don't know, week or less on Sorbet, just wanted to give you a preview, basically what it would look like to add Sorbet to your project. So I think it's now to me it's straightforward after like messing around with it, but there's just like a few steps. You basically you basically add the gems, and you run through a few commands. Gotta stop doing that. Sorry. You basically run a few commands. So you basically initialize, and then what first thing Sorbet will do, it will create this SRB folder, and it'll basically require all the files in your project, and it'll try and do a best guess at extracting and generating type annotations for all your different classes. And basically, depending on how many errors it finds for each file, it'll add basically a type annotation message at the top of the file. And there's basically different degrees or strictness levels for type checking. So if, for example, one of your files, has, or if Sorbet reports a high number of type checking errors for one of your files, it'll basically mark it as type false, and it won't continue to type check that file on subsequent runs. So the reason for doing this is, well, it's kind of, if you have a pretty large and complex existing project, you can't really just add type checking and expect it to be done really fast. This is kind of it's a long and sustained effort in trying to add typing information to your project, because your project typically isn't only going to contain code, your own code, like you're relying on a lot of other libraries and tools. So you could imagine, like, shoot, how do I generate these RBI files for code that I don't own? So there's actually a couple of gems to help out with that. So one being Sorbet typed, which is just handwritten RBI files for a lot of popular gems. Like I think a lot of the active record libraries, there's RBI files for that, as well as, I don't know, a lot of, what are some popular gems? I don't know, like Devise. Yeah, a lot of that stuff. Well, and then there's also Sorbet Rails, which is, I guess, exclusively RBI files for Rails, not just that kind of stuff. So the big question is, so are we going to adopt type checking at Degico? And I can confidently tell you, find out on the next episode of your favorite anime. I don't know. It's quite hard to say. I mean, like my limited usage of it isn't really enough to go on, but I mean, it's an interesting thing to look at for sure. I don't know if anyone would like to share your views on adopting type checking for projects here at Degico. For it? Okay. Yeah, that's a great point. Always great to catch errors before they happen in production, for sure. Definitely less costly and embarrassing. Any other opinions? Anyone that doesn't want to adopt type checking? Not, you don't have to be ashamed.
I think if you're going to introduce type checking, it might be worth considering a new technology altogether, like whether or not you want to work with Ruby or not.
Mhm.
So if you decide that you need a statically typed language,
Right.
I wonder whether it would be better to kind of shift the tech stack to something else.
Okay. Yeah, that's
Depends on how well it works. And of course, shifting tech stacks entirely is going to be a lot more work than upgrading to something that's supported in Ruby 3, right?
Yes, I mean, if it works as advertised, then it would be great. Like if it was plug and play and it just gives you type annotations and everything's nice, then yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I just wonder how it would work in reality with a large scale project. Just throwing that out there.
I mean, like,
I have to think about it.
Well, I think the main benefit I see of this is that you can implement type checking only in certain parts of the code.
right.
Instead
right.
of if you switch to a different programming language, you need to migrate everything. You could, introduce this only, for example, on API controllers that need that, or a specific business critical part of your code where the risk is higher. You could implement this. I think that is the big benefit of having this dynamically. You choose where you want to use it.
Yeah. So I mentioned at the very beginning, Sorbet is what they call a gradual type checking system. So yeah, like Keanu said, you don't have to use it on every single file in your project. You can just identify critical features and use it on that. But of course, that you kind of have to have really clear boundaries if you want to do that. Yeah, that's definitely a great point.
Doesn't play very nicely with metaprogramming. So if you're trying to
Oh, yeah, a lot of defined methods and like delegating methods and things like that. It can get.
How does SRP work if you implemented a method against on class?
That is a great question. Basically, there's a whole bunch of like they have. It's very interesting. So like when you run the type checking by Sorbet, it'll output a whole bunch of errors, obviously, and then it'll actually give you links to a specific errors page that they have. So like they basically have an error code. I've seen it go up to like 9,000, and it'll give you like guidance on basically how to rewrite certain parts of your code where it's like really hard for Sorbet to know. So I mean, in that case, you kind of have to manually write those type annotations to accept multiple classes and things like that. It does when you first initialize Sorbet with your project, it does its best. But obviously, given how crazy dynamic Ruby is, it's a really tough problem to solve. So yeah, and like in those cases, you really have to just do the manual type annotations yourself.
Do they support DSLs?
If you
They'll be able to perform a type check
one-time error.
yeah, there's
Yeah,
There's-
an example would be like if I have an active record model
Yeah.
that I say belongs to payment.
Yeah.
Can I get type checking for this dot payment?
if you install the RBI files from the Sorbet Rails gem. Yeah. Yeah, because obviously, Rails is such a popular Ruby web framework used. Yeah, there's already been like a large effort by the Ruby and Rails community to account for this, basically to have all these RBI files, RBI analysis ready. Is there anything left? Oh, well, okay. Okay. So if you're interested in like learning more, I kind of just dumped a bunch of different links that I was looking at while trying to compile this information. And I think with that, yeah, I think that about wraps it up. So yeah,